Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Alana. It is the sixth session, seventh session, eighth session, couple more sessions after this one on what has been a long boot camp for people who are early stage researchers, designing, putting together your proposal, getting the really hard part of how do we make this a consistent story together. So welcome. Whether you're here live or by recording, I'm very pleased to have you here. And today we're going into discussing the review of literature from slightly different angle that I think may be very helpful. So we're going to have a how's it going discussion. Some people in the room are already typing those out. We're going to look at the review of literature from the perspective of the end game. So some people here were actually on yesterday's webinar for people who have data, and they're going to see some slides they saw yesterday. But I believe that if we know where we're going and we look backwards at where at how things fit together, that can be a really good perspective. And then you can be here and stuff that direction isn't as mysterious. We'll analyze some published sources. We'll have a response. There wasn't much response to my call for data, so I have a few examples from education. So some of you, I know a lot of you are not education people, but there's still the system I'm talking about will make sense. I pulled out the metacognitive way of working, and I hope this is helpful. So how's it going? Let's see what we've got in the room. Progressing through the literature review and enjoying the use of a topic-based matrix, meaning that we're putting it together in a conceptual framework. And then we're under that, like a Venn diagram. You're going to see me do this a lot today, 3 circles overlapping in the middle. And then within those, then you're telling your reader, my ideas go here, and this is it. And then there's some here, and there's some lit here, and here, and this is how it all fits together. That is the single easiest way to get a reader through a lit review. So I'm glad it's working. For others, working on analyzing results. So those of you that are early stage and just starting as part of this class, fast forward a year from now when you've got your results, and you'll be in a whole different kind of space about what this whole research means. So now we're putting the pieces together, and then you really become a researcher. It changes your life. Things are going well, lots of reading. This is the series that will make the proposal easier. And finding this community has been a game changer. Alice, that's so good to hear. I just went to a topical webinar with a bunch of deans from graduate schools, everybody concerned about how to build community in an online remote space. So very glad to know that this, writ large, is helpful. Blending the lit review and my own voice and argument is a difficult dance right now. Pat, it's a difficult dance. It is not an easy dance. It's a iterative. So you will do this and you think you've got it all together, and then you come back and you're reworking that same problem that you had before from a slightly different direction. Just everybody know that's what it's like. It's like that for everyone. And then we can be just a little easier with ourselves when it's hard. It doesn't have to, and Penelope says she doesn't want this series to end. It doesn't have to end. This group, these things can continue in a different format. Got to take a few weeks off in August, but I'm more than happy to set aside a time a week for this ongoing discussion to continue. We just need some direction about what that might look like. It can be peer-to-peer reading. It can be all kinds of things. So Penelope, thank you for saying that, and let's talk more. Adrian, Pat, the lit you include in your writing is there to help you advance your argument, not the other way around. That's true. The lit helps advance the argument. It's good to know what the argument is and hone in the lit. And then you have to look and say, is there other lit that disagrees with this argument, and what do I do with that? Moving from archaeology to environmental science has been hard, as I understood the theory in archaeology, and now it's like I'm running in place now. Getting your theoretical underpinning takes time. That would be great to have a support group and address issues as we continue moving forward. All right, we've got 3 or 4 votes for that idea. I'll take it on board. We'll start the last week in August, first week in September, and we'll see what we want to do with it. You'll be back in your own universities in different ways. So is it every week? Is it every other week? How does it work? What do we do? Good. Okay, we've got some votes for that, and hopefully those of you who watch by recording all the time can appreciate that as well. Okay, let's go on. I'm going to remind everybody, because some people are just coming in late, that if you're not keeping a journal of what you are doing, sooner or later it will bite you in the butt. You need to have records. They are useful later on when you're at the end game and you're figuring out what you did. Your memory won't be everything you want it to be. And if you get stalled for some reason, that journal is a lifeline to keep you moving forward. Forget the TAMU login part, but the website pd.education has a lot of resources for you. If you haven't gone there and seriously gone through that to-do list that's got all those red arrows, then you want to do that, because those red arrows are the important, everybody should be using things. The must-see videos, if you haven't watched them all, just put it in your backdrop to download them to your phones or whatever, listen to them when you're driving in the car. Just have those things as a backlog to your ideas about graduate work, and they will be much easier. The upper right-hand corner is a piece of paper with a line down the middle. The stuff on the left-hand side is your notes about what you're doing. The stuff on the right is your reflection on it. What am I going to do next? What did that mean to me? I read this article. What am I taking from that article? Whatever goes on in our heads gets captured on the right. Later on, when you're writing, those things become invaluable as well. Just a few hints if you haven't taken them all on board. And if you haven't come to office hours, or you haven't put questions up at www.wooclap.com/summerqs, then think about that, because this is ways to get your questions answered. Okay. Now let's talk about this idea of the lit review from the perspective of a year from now when you're finishing. You've got your data. You've analyzed your data. And you're moving into your discussion, and then all of a sudden everything in your lit needs to lead you to that discussion. So what is the role in literature at the end game? You are making an argument. And your argument now, pre-proposal, beginning researchers, you have to send something off to your university. Your argument now is, I have this idea about research. It's backed up by lit, and it's worthy that you should give me permission to go do my work. At the end, though, you're making an argument that you learned this important stuff for your field. It's significant to a particular batch of people. Maybe it's significant globally, maybe it's significant nationally, maybe it's significant to your practice in your own location. Research can be significant to any of those levels, but we need to claim a specific significance, and then our lit actually helps us claim that significance. It's the evidence on which your claim of significance rests. That's a subtlety. So your analysis of data is what your claim to knowing something rests, but your lit, which will then get discussed later in the discussion, is where you say how important it is. So let's look at it this way. Your literature is all global. All over the world, people have written research about your topic. Then you can claim global significance to what you have done much more easily. If you have a local significance, then if your work is all about some of these people that I'm going to use as examples are teachers or principals, so their work is to a school district. But it's an important idea to the country. It's important in education. The lit is in education, even though all their data is local, they can make a case that the significance is both. Do you see? And some of you are studying very finite things in a particular location, but everybody in your field should pay attention. The lit helps you do that. So that's an important piece. The second thing is that since your discussion ties them all together, you don't want a lot in the lit that isn't being used in the discussion. Maybe a few things that lead to something else. So maybe A plus B equals C. You need to have A and B there short so that we can get a grip of what C is, because we're going to really discuss C in the discussion after the analysis. So you need to build maps or ideas from how this lit fits in to your final discussion. Now, as early career researchers, you don't have your data yet. You don't know what you're going to say yet. You're just guessing. But you can guess smart rather than not so smart. Just a few other things. Since the review of literature becomes substantive in the discussion, once again, you want to include all the lit that addresses the outcome of the data that you now suspect you're going to have. So you have some idea about what your data is going to say, and you want to make sure it's covered. Let me give a Venn diagram suggestion. So my conceptual map is, I'll just use my own. My research always drills into whether or not professional development online helps push back on PhD completion and retention issues. So I have to have lit on PhD retention and completion. I have to have lit on online professional development. But within those bigger circles, there's some smaller circles. So I could have a smaller circle in the PhD completion that had to do with community, say. And I could have a smaller group that had to do with, I don't know, content analysis. And then I could have other smaller groups. When I'm going after some data, as I'm going to be analyzing the data from the summer and these boot camps, I have an idea what I'm going to get data on, and I need to have the lit around it so that I can discuss it later. So my big topics aren't everything I need. I also need the little topics. Right now, I hope all of you are beginning to draw out your circles, and you're thinking, oh yeah, I have this kind of lit, and here are my inner circles. And then you want to, do you have everything you think you're going to need for your data? Do you have the ideas that you've worked with? Do you have them so that they fit together in your head well? Because if they fit together, if you can draw this out, you can give it to somebody else in a lit review. Have you really looked in your lit into the key debates in your field? Like in it would have been pre-COVID, there would have been a serious debate about whether or not remote professional development could do what on-campus professional development could do. Times have changed 4 months later, and maybe that's not such a big controversy. But I need to know who is written on both sides of that controversy. I need to go looking for lit that online professional development doesn't work. I need to see what those people say. And then if my work advances the field by cementing best practice for online professional development, which is what I think it does. I need to go look at other people's best practice literature. I need to see what is involved in that. I need to hone myself towards that. And if I find literature all over the world, I can claim global, although I can probably claim global anyway because my data will be global. Okay, so there is talking it through from a particular perspective. And then if you're giving it to your reader, what does your reader need? Your reader needs hooks to hang it on. And I like the Venn diagram hook. It just seems to work. There are others, but if you can keep it to 3 kind of general categories and they overlap nicely and you can even draw them out, your reader will get it. Then what's within those Venns, I need to have headings and I need to organize what I say so that my reader can follow my points. You're setting up a rather complex stepping stones through a lot of stuff you've taken years to learn, and you need them to learn it in 20 pages. So you have to do that strategically. You need to build a substantive and critical analysis of the literature. You have to write and think critically about that. So let me talk about that because that's kind of scary. To write and think critically, you just need to give yourself some space and you need to look at everything you've got from a lot of different angles. Like so-and-so said this and I really buy into it and I have this nice paragraph and it says that all these great people agree with me. But now I have to take a critical view and I have to say, does everybody agree with me? Where would I go find the people who didn't agree with me? If there are people who didn't agree with this, what would they be saying? What could that be looking at? How do I find that voice? And then I have to be able to think in terms of pros and cons about what I think, to release myself from my biases and put on a persona that really thinks that everything I do is just baloney. And then I have to be able to take on that conversation and be able to write in a way that shows my reader I have thought and am writing critically about it. It's not easy. And within the pd.education site, there are quite, if you type in critical, you can even go to the left-hand side and pull down criticality, and you'll get critical reading, critical writing, critical research, critical analysis. It's a way of looking at the world from the other person's point of view. Once you have that, then you can build out the general and foundational points you want to use. You can say a few things in a paragraph and have big group citations rather than this person kind of did this or this topic and then there's one. If you look at your lit review and there's a lot of single citations, I'm going to say to you, you haven't gone deep enough. Because within your field, within your thoughts, there are groups of people who are working. So you have to find the groups and outline them. And then you can drill from the groups into the specifics, and it'll be much more interesting. And that's what I mean by discuss in depth how research leads to your ideas. Once again, I've drawn it, I understand it, I see the components. I'm really on top of this when I write it. And then you investigate and you disclose all the disagreements, all the things that may be something else. And they may be just a sentence or two. You just may say, yeah, although that's the track I take in this lit review, I just want to notice that there are some people who believe other things. And then you give them a lot of citations. And you don't have to make a big deal out of it, but it's important to show that you have done that kind of work. You will use this lit again to unpack your data and your findings in the discussion. So the more you can think ahead now, the more likely that will be easier a year from now. And that level you compare and you contrast with your own work. So as you're putting these things together, imagine your own work and imagine the comparison and the contrast with your work. And then all of that proves your significance. Okay, so that's a lot of words. It was pretty concise about what a lit review needs to be, but it was a lot of words. So sometimes it's easier to draw things out than it is to talk about them. So you can write your argument on the left, and the argument is always that you claim this something to be true, and you've demonstrated it with your data, and that is either in line, adds to, or refutes current literature. So those three things: adds, in line with, adds to, refutes. Three possibilities. Can be a mixture. Sometimes you have data that adds to this, refutes that. Okay, so then you need to have the lit review back up the adds to, refutes part. So you need to have discussed it. And I like this 3 Venn diagram. So I'm calling the circle 1A, circle 2B, circle 3C. And then I'm going to discuss circle A, and I'm going to make a few points, and I'm going to discuss circle B, and I'll make a few points, and I'll discuss C, same thing, and then I'll make a conclusion. And then in the final degree, you make the final discussion, you build the points. But today, because you can't get there, in that right-hand section, you're going to talk about the significance of your work and how you've set up the significance in that framework as well. So let's give this a couple of examples. And I'm hoping in this that you can see one of these examples flows pretty smoothly. One of these examples doesn't flow so well. And I want you to get that tension. So these are finished pieces. They're about education because, as I said, I didn't get a lot of opportunity to talk about other things. So we're just going to use education as our framework today. But everything I say, you could figure out in every other field. And so even I just want to say, some of you are STEM scientists and engineers, and in your work, it's very typical that there's an assumption that your data just speaks for itself. You don't have to make such a big deal about the argument in writing often, because there's this assumption that the data speaks for itself. That doesn't make it any less important, and it's also useful for you to be able to discuss your arguments as other fields have to discuss their arguments, even though you may or may not have to write them out. But today we're using education, and they have to say everything in words. Okay, so this is about trying to scale undergraduate scientific writing, and they're going to use a particular tool. Prominent feature analysis is a reliable and valid writing assessment tool derived from the writing, and it is used to assess. And so it's about looking at this through this assessment tool. And then and they tried to use it 2 times to show distance between one and the other, to see whether or not students were writing better scientifically. Prominent feature scores did not correlate significantly between the sets. This suggests that while this writing assessment is a valid and appropriate tool for the analysis of undergraduate scientific research, it is not suitable for tracking changes in writing ability, or at least not in this small a sample. Okay, I've always said, and if you ever worry about this, I'm sure this author did not think that they were going to get the results they got. They got results that said it's not going to work. But they still graduate. It's as useful to do science that goes nowhere as it is to do science that does what you think it's going to do. So I'm sure they started off thinking they were going to get to show increase in scientific writing, and then the tool didn't work for them. But here's their lit review. They told us the writing assessment background, a background of the tool, importance of feedback, which I guess is part of the tool, so that kind of makes sense. Writing assessment types, importance and mastery of scientific writing, and assessment types. I'm the gray there because I don't quite get why that's there. It didn't didn't logically follow to me just from what I'm seeing. I'm not saying that if I dig into it deeper, it might not follow, but you want your work to be so clear that you even put down these 3 pieces and it just smooths. And then the discussion was, this is the significance part, linguistic and scientific prominent features in writing. So that's what they got from the analysis. Relationship between those features, they talked about them, correlation of those scores with GPA and ACT scores, and analysis of its use to assess change in the writing samples. The significance is not clear in the discussion or in the framework, and there is something here. I mean, they passed, they graduated. It's within the realm of fine, but look at the comparison to this one. So this is about Hawaiian culture-based education, reclaiming Native Hawaiian education. So there's a particular Hawaiian culture-based education, HCBE, can be used to decolonize educational practices by increasing cultural relevancy and compatibility within schools. The purpose of the study was to better understand implementation of HCBE framework components. So all around the world, the indigenous populations have this same problem, and this is a curriculum aimed at helping them have education that isn't so Western-based that it flies in the face of their personal culture. The findings showed that although there was the range of the extent that teachers at the school understood and implemented this curriculum, there was a commitment to Hawaiian language, there was a commitment to relationships, there was a commitment to the importance of relationship building family and community, remained an area of challenge, and that teachers prided themselves on delivering meaningful, personalized learning, and which that the professional development did that too. So that's their findings. Now the framework in the lit: systemic loss due to colonization, systemic reclamation, types of learning setups, and opposing viewpoints. Very 1, 2, 3, 4. From the same topics that show up in the abstract, and the same topics that show up in the discussion, that Hawaiian culture-based education, relationships, the language, and the simultaneously the student or the teachers resist mandates. The study concludes that leadership matters. So on this one, I did not do just absolutely the best discussion of it, but this one really flowed. I could see when I looked at the lit, everything there, I could see why it was there and how it flowed from there. And it sets up significance. This is significance to the world of people in education with indigenous populations. And they set that up by the discussion of systemic loss due to colonization, because that's the same discussion in literature that all indigenous people around the world will have. And then they discuss the specifics with the reclamation in this particular project, how the learning was set up, and what others think, the opposing viewpoints, which I think also ended up with some of the things they had to say about how the teachers approached it. All right, so show of hands, please, because sometimes you have ideas in your head and you try to explain them very well, and you're not always sure that people in the room get them. Was it clear from that this first one was not as straightforward a flow through the lit review as the second one? Raise your little hand in the chat box, please, if you get it, if you just see that that's true. And there are now 17 of you in the room. So let's see if a majority can say yes or not. If I don't see a majority go up, I'll see if I can reframe it a different way or give it to you a little differently. I have some examples, and perhaps if it's not quite clear now, Some of you raising your hand multiple times. We'll still only call you once. So no, I'm not quite getting it. I didn't quite make the halfway point. That's okay. It's a subtlety. It's a subtlety that you don't always see. So let me see if this next bit, thank you for your votes. Let's see if this next helps. When I called the educators for data, I got both. These are now they're in the same place you are. They are putting their research together, and they have different educational challenges. And we're looking now at what the problem statement says, how the lit is put together, and what the significance is. And is there clues to that significance is in the lit? So this is now analysis at your stage. Research findings indicate that school districts who serve bilingual students do not have well-established professional development programs. Consequently, bilingual teachers are not armed with appropriate skills to meet the academic, linguistic, and cultural need of students. And then I put in some stuff I didn't need. When bilingual teachers are not provided with professional development opportunities, their students are at an educational disadvantage. This study aims to investigate to what extent do professional development needs differ between the presently employed pre-kindergarten through 6th grade bilingual teachers. So they have a group of teachers. They're going to research them in clusters of teachers who've been teaching 1 to 5 years, 6 to 11, and over 11 years, because their theoretical component is that the needs for professional development differ the longer you've been at the job. It makes some kind of sense. So their framework, the theoretical framework is andragogy, which is about adult learning. They're going to talk about the historical background of bilingual education in the nation, the state, and local. And the same thing with professional development, nationally, state, and local. That's important. Need for professional development is 2 policies, the Every Student Succeeds Act and the policy about teacher preparation. And then their research on teachers' changing needs at different stages, 1 to 5, 6 to 11, and 11 plus. Finally, professional development and bilingual ed, linguistic awareness, cultural awareness, and goals of different models. So I did a little conversation here that I personally think that history is overrated in a lit review. I think very seldom do you end up talking, is your research based on anything that goes on in that history? And your discussion of your final results definitely won't probably do much about history. So as a person who reads a lot of these things, I find history overrated. I understand that you may want to use it because you know a lot about the history that got you to this problem, but it may not be the best thing for your reader. In this case, there's a case for it, and that's the fact that national, state, and local is in both of those top few. And this person is setting up a significance of their work, of what they're going to study, being important at the national, state, and local level. So I appreciated putting those things in. When you have 4 or 5 things in a framework like this, and you want to collapse it to 3 because 3 really is going to be better for your reader, think in terms of, can some of these things be collapsed? Could the need for professional development would be the need for professional development writ large, and subheadings be policy, the changing needs at different stages, and what professional development generally needs to be for bilingual education. Are there ways that these topics can be coalesced? Is a question, but nevertheless, those are the topics this person has. And the significance of the study is to national, state, and local leaders. So they're setting that up in the Lit Review. And they aim to improve bilingual education through professional development. So those things are both there. And they're going to study teachers at 3 different stages. So that's there. So this Lit ties up both sides of that continuum, and it's a nice balance. It's still in progress, and she may coalesce and she may do some other things, but it's a solid logical design. This one is wobbly, but it's still within the range. It's not yet defensible. And so I wanted to show you one that just wasn't working, because these are the hardest for your supervisors, for you. From your perspective, you don't know why it isn't, if you don't understand the full picture yet, because you haven't really done that yet, it's really hard to know why people keep poking at your design. It seems like you have all the same pieces everybody else has. So why isn't this working? And I'm hoping to show you the wobbles here. So the red is what the student has written, the green are my ideas as I'm trying to figure out with them what it's going to take to make this thing get solid. The problem that the study would address is that this is about districts of innovation, which is a policy that some school districts sign up for. It allows them to hire people differently to fulfill needs, to build out their innovation side of what they're doing for K-12. The problem is that the study would address is that a district, in the effort to be more fiscally responsible, spends less money on staff members, which then sacrifice experience and expertise, ultimately leading to lower student outcomes. So the problem with that is that it is, as far as I can tell, absolutely biased. I looked, and there were some articles that said these things, that suggested that there was this problem, but there is no data, and that's a very strong problem statement without data. You can't base a problem on other people's ideas of what a problem is. You have to base a problem on some kind of definable fact, and that's unclear. This type of exemption, the District of Innovation is an exemption, could potentially allow a district to spend fewer tax dollars on staff salaries. Staff salaries typically comprise a large expenditure, an annual budgetary. Again, as far as I'm clear so far, this person has no actual data that these things go on. So I have a concern about bias. And so how do you take an idea? It happens. We read something, we get a little anxious about it, we decide that's a good study for research, and we have the ability to go research that. So we're on a trail. But we are trying to get after a problem somebody else pointed out. We don't know for a fact it's a problem. One of the things we can do is make it a neutral study. We can study whether and to what extent there is a problem. We can set the lit up to say, here's all the lit for districts of innovation, and here's all the lit against districts of innovation. There's obviously a gap in the middle. We don't really know. Our research is going to fill that gap. But because this author so far has taken the negative, they're stuck. So what do they do with their lit review? The historical adoption of districts of innovation, the practical research on districts of innovation, and literature on concerning. So that's almost right, isn't it? I mean, that would be a good setup of this. If you were studying whether or not it worked, then you could put your lit in the middle of that, or your gap. You could put your study in the middle of that gap. Another thing, and that's the green, is that there's some kind of framework here that would allow this to be more neutral. It could be a theoretical framework. Somebody else that did work in this field based it on site-based management literature. There could be policies you could be investigating. There could be policies on continuous improvement that you were investigating. There could be something that is the big circle within that. If you draw this one out, it's a big circle you're looking for. And then you have the circle that is the people who agree with it, the circle that's the people who don't agree with it, and your study goes right in the middle. Therefore, you can claim significance to the school district administrators and ultimately to any administrator in the United States who's thinking about this particular fiscal policy. You can see how what they've got isn't working, and yet there's possibilities there. Some of you may, I see that it was a little hard to follow. Yeah, sometimes you have things in your head and it's hard to get them out of your head. Bottom line is, what does the reviewer think? What's the reviewer going to think? How was I thinking about this? So what could you follow when you're thinking about it yourself? And Penelope, hopefully this will happen. I looked at that last one and I said, what's the argument? Does the argument make sense? And I came up with no, not really. And then I said, what level of significance are they going to claim? Are you going to claim? Global, national, state, local, a mixture. Okay, so that's the two sides. Then you say, how does that framework in the middle, how does it, oops, I went the wrong direction. How does that framework organize itself conceptually? And does it serve both sides? Does it serve the argument? Does it serve the significance? And then, is this something I can work with? How can I organize within that lit so that my reader can follow it? So there's a discussion there I can have. And then, do I think it's going to play out at the very end to have all the components I think I'm going to need to discuss when I get my data? Is that more helpful? Sometimes when you think things through, you just get off on a tangent. So raise your hand if that little metacognitive process made more sense. Last thing I want to do is confuse you. Okay, good. So that's what I was doing. I was thinking out loud as I looked through those pieces. And I want you to be able to think out loud this way. I want you to be able to look at your work and say this, 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 and this. And I think I can put it together. Okay, that helped. I feel better. So if you haven't had a chance to raise your hand yet, what questions do you have? And we'll just take a minute for you to think about those questions and maybe made sense. Struggling to take my study topic through the same ringer. Okay, that'll take some time, Alice. It won't just boom happen. You're gonna have. It's probably, you know, it takes me 15 minutes of looking at docs to figure these things out. So, you know, give yourself some time. But for most of us, breaking stuff down into little portions gives us a more clear way of seeing, does this flow or not flow? And you also might want to do it. So here it is. It's in the slides. The slides are in the handouts. They're not showing handouts, are they? Let me look. Yeah, it's up there. And one of you asked what a group citation is. So I talk about this. I have this Venn diagram, and I'm drawing out this circle of PhD completion research. And there will be hundreds of studies that pinpoint PhDs not completing because of the challenges between the student and the supervisor, or completing well because of the challenge, or because of not having a challenge between the student and the supervisor. Our lit really pins a lot of your success or not success on your relationship with your supervisor. And I could literally have, it is typical in educational literature that the supervisor-student relationship is quoted as being the most significant something. And I could probably choose 50 or more people and their dates if I wanted to make some incredibly big group citation. You don't usually want to make them that big. But what you do want to do is you want to make the main statements from your work. These are the things most of us agree on, 1, 2, and 3, and those will all have 5, 10 people after them, enough that it's significant for the viewer to see, not so much that it's a couple of lines just of names and years. You have to choose the most important and you put those in, but that's a group citation. If you look at your literature and it's only single citations, something happened, here's the person, something else, there's the person, then you haven't either given groups of people the main stuff or you haven't gotten to the main stuff yet. Okay. So this is going to be no surprise to any of you. What's the homework? It's to do this. It's to go through the lit as you plan to use it. Put your argument on one side, your lit, just your headings, just where you're going. Think about your Venn diagram, sort that out, and then is the lit, as you've designed it, going to give you the significance you need? And does this conceptual design for your lit back up your argument? And then you might just, if you have time, you might just want to look at one of your models and map it out too, because it's useful to map. It's useful to go through that set of metacognitive steps. So we always end the same way. Here's a SurveyMonkey link. I really appreciate it if you would go take it right now, because we need to know, are we hitting the mark? And if we're not hitting the mark, what we might do better. And if you right now think about that, you'll be great. It'll be great. It's not like giving us a grade. It's like helping us get better. And I don't have the second slide that I always have, but coming up next week is a conversation really about the totality. We've got a couple of weeks left, and I want to help you get your work to defensible proposal stage. What I'd really love is for half a dozen of you to send me the proposal you are working on and let me see where you are. Warrants it all. It's not like I am not your supervisor. I can see stuff in that's awful, that you know is awful. You can even tell me what problems you're having when you send it on to me. I do ask that you have a navigation pane in your writing so that I can click on the navigation pane and I can go quickly through the document without scrolling. So that's my request. Send me anything you have, as long as it has a navigation pane. Write any kind of note you want to write, and you send it to Alana at doctoralnet.com. And you send it by Sunday night. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at what you sent, and I'm going to plan out, hopefully half a dozen or more of you in the room right now will send me something. And I'll just be able to go, okay, here's the biggest problems that I see, and here's what I could do. Not all of you will be so lucky is that I really help you at the same time specifically that I'm helping other people see. But whether or not that is true, I will be able to, you will get help because I will literally see the problems you are having. I've worked with so many people through this process that I am very familiar with the stages. I just don't know without looking what stage you're in. So you can help me and everybody else by sending it. And you're going to get the chance, if you're not quite ready to send it this week, plan on being ready to send it next week because we're going to do the same thing again next week. And Erica, you know, she said it's hard getting it past this awful stage. It's hard. I don't even mind seeing an awful stage. It may or may not be useful to me, but it's paying forward, really. Your sending things on may just help everybody get the insight that they needed to. It's what we do, Penelope. Happy to continue doing it. I don't read in detail like your supervisors do anymore. That's a bit like, I used to say it was like raining anvils in my life. All of a sudden one of these documents would hit and I'd have to go through it. I don't do that anymore, but what I do is if you give me a navigation pane, I'm pretty good at hitting the highlights and helping you guide your ship in a better direction. Okay, any other questions? Raise your hand if you have a question. I will turn off the recording for people who are watching by recording. Thank you very much. You too can send your work as long as you're watching this within a within a short period of time. If you watch it in the middle of August, there's no work to send it.